William Shakespeare wrote the most famous tragedy ever performed, a story about grief and loss, about a father and a son separated by death. And this movie presents an answer for how William Shakespeare was able to capture that grief and pain experience.
Now, everybody hold hands and get ready to cry.
We tend to think of Shakespeare as a legend, a myth, a name printed on school assignments and theater programs. Not as a father, not as a husband, not as a man who could lose something he could never replace. Hamnet strips away the legend and gives us the person. It shows us William Shakespeare before he was immortal, before he was required reading, back when he was just a man trying to build a life and then trying to survive the loss of it. Because this isn't really a story about how Shakespeare became famous, it's a story about why he needed to write it all. And with that in mind, welcome back to The Rank. I'm John. Just a quick heads up on format. I'll hit a handful of behind the scenes facts called the Potent Notables, then I'll do a movie overview with spoilers, and I'll finish by ranking the movie across 10 categories. And today I'm going to continue ranking the 2025 Best Picture nominees with Hamnet, starring Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal, adapted from the novel by Maggie O'Farrell by herself and the director Chloé Zhao. Hamnet is nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Original Score, Best Costume Design, Best Casting, Best Production Design, Best Director for Chloé Zhao, Best Actress for Jessie Buckley, and of course, Best Picture. But let's see how it stacks up, starting with the Potent Notables.
Potent Notables.
As always, we start the Potent Notables with the box office info. As of February 18th, 2026, Hamnet has made $22.7 million domestically and $57.5 million internationally, for a worldwide total of $80.2 million. And this is all against a budget of $30 million. So it's a solid financial success, especially for a quiet, introspective historical drama like this. Now, of course, Hamnet is directly tied to one of the most famous works ever written, Hamlet. But what's fascinating is that even Shakespeare didn't invent that story from scratch. The foundation comes from Gesta Danorum, or History of the Danes, written over 400 years earlier by the historian Saxo Grammaticus. That text tells the story of Prince Hamlet, who returns home to find that his uncle has murdered his father and married his mother. Shakespeare actually anglicized the names. Amleth became Hamlet, Gerutha became Gertrude, and Rorik became Yorick. So this is one of the oldest revenge stories ever told, passed down and reshaped across centuries. Now, behind the camera, this film went through an interesting evolution. Sam Mendes was originally set to direct, with Tom Holland cast as William Shakespeare. Mendes ultimately stepped away as a director, but remained on as a producer, and Chloé Zhao took over the film. One of the most emotional moments in the film, when Will asks Hamnet if he'll be brave, was partially improvised. Now, I'm not sure how to say the actor who played Hamnet's name, but during his callback, Jacoby Jupes, I'm not sure how to say it, Paul Mescal unexpectedly picked him up and threw him over his shoulders mid-scene, just to see how he would react. The kid stayed in character, and Zhao was so impressed that she actually wrote the roughhousing into the final script. It's one of those small human moments that help make the relationship seem real. There are also some subtle details hidden in the film. In the scene where Susanna hands Agnes the leaflet for Hamlet, the names listed are the actual surnames of the actors portraying the characters in Hamlet. It's a quiet little meta touch that connects the actors to the theatrical world they're inhabiting. And Zhao's commitment to realism extended even further. For the scene where Shakespeare is drunk, she asked Paul Mescal to actually drink. Mescal agreed, calling it a fun experiment, and also confirmed that he was very hungover the next day. But those are all the Potent Notables. Let's go to the movie overview. So I went into this movie without much knowledge of Shakespeare's biography, nor any knowledge of the book by Maggie O'Farrell. I didn't know Shakespeare had a son named Hamnet. The only thing that I had was that I had once read the play about 10 years ago. And when I first saw the name of this movie, I honestly thought it was going to be some kind of weird farce, a send-up of the classic tragedy of Shakespeare's. Then I saw it getting Oscar buzz and I was like, Hamnet? Really? And then I watched the movie. Now, on Amazon Prime, where they list the genres of the movie underneath the title, it says drama, historical, check, and then heavy. Yes, this is a heavy movie. Now, it's nice to go into a movie not knowing anything about it really, or not having any expectations. Now, of course, I did the Potent Notables before watching, which is where I discovered that Shakespeare had a son named Hamnet, and that he died at 11 from the plague. And honestly, that knowledge was welcome, because if I didn't have that knowledge going into it, it might have hit me even harder. And it was hard enough already. Either way, though, this is a story with two halves. The first half is a love story, and the second half is redemption. But let's start with the first half. Right away, the movie wants us to know that Hamlet and Hamnet were considered the same name and were interchangeable. And then we're introduced to a lady sleeping on the ground in a forest, and she's friends with a hawk. So, a little odd, but it's not long before we see what the story of the first half will be, the love story. William Shakespeare is tutoring Agnes's younger half-siblings in Latin when he sees her out the window. He thinks she's likely a servant of the family. So when he hits on her, he thinks he's hitting on somebody that's below his station, or maybe at the same station as him. I mean, he's actually only doing the tutoring gig to pay off his father's ample debts to this family. Now, Agnes's older brother Bartholomew seems to be the master of the house because it looks like her father has passed. We will find out soon enough that her mother and father had 2 children together, her and Bartholomew, before her mom passed away, and then her dad ended up marrying another lady who bore him at least 3 more children before he passed away. On the other side, Will's dad had a bunch of kids, of which it seems that Will is the oldest. It also appears that Will's father is not afraid of corporal punishment, as we see him smack Will several times in the movie. It's not just physical abuse either. His father's going to tell him that he'll amount to nothing and does not hide his deep disappointment. He even goes so far as to show disgust at Will being a tutor, at which point Will is going to rightfully point out he's only doing that gig to pay off his father's debts. And that's when we see the father's first outburst of violence. It also explains why, in the beginning, Will is perpetually clad with a wound to his forehead. But we'll get a lot of symbolism in this movie. The wound to symbolize Will's abuse suffering, Agnes's need to be in nature to show her paganism, Agnes's cleaning of Will's wound to show that she heals him not just physically but emotionally. They seem to be a good match. But just like any good romance, one of them needs to be reticent, and it's usually the woman. And it's no different in this one. Will is going to need to convince Agnes that they should be together. And he's going to do this by telling her the Greek tragedy of Eurydice, which was actually really fun for me because that was a play my oldest kid was in their first year of high school. I wasn't expecting to ever hear about Eurydice ever again. Anyway, it's not long before Will proposes to Agnes, and since they both agree that their families won't bless the wedding, they decide they should go consummate this proposal in a barn. And thanks to this one afternoon delight, Agnes becomes pregnant, which ends up forcing both of their families to agree to their marriage. Although I will say Bartholomew seems to be more accepting of Agnes's opinions than Will's family is of his. But Agnes is going to move into Will's family's house, and soon after that we're going to see her running off into the forest to go have the baby by herself in the woods. Luckily for Agnes, she doesn't have umbilical cords for her births, as we will see for all of her children. Because I would think that'd be hard to cut on your own. Maybe you'd assume that she bit through it, but there weren't any blood streaks on her face. All the while, by the way, the score of the movie really seemed to want me to think that I was watching a horror movie. It was just this general sense of unease, and it made me feel like I needed to be on the alert for jump scares. But shortly after the birth of Susanna, the kid in the woods here, Will is going to become a pensive, angsty teenager that's prone to drinking. We're also going to see him have it out with his dad. His dad's going to hit him again, and this time, Will's going to put the fear into him, which is going to help us discover what Will is so worried about. He's afraid he's going to be like his father. And this stirs in Agnes not only a desire to comfort him, but also develops a belief in her mind that Will is meant for more than this small town in northern England. He needs to go to London. And you'll be surprised to hear, William Shakespeare does actually go to London. Unfortunately for Agnes, she's sending him off when she's pregnant again. So she's going to be giving birth without Will nearby. Interestingly though, she's not giving birth alone this time, because the river is overflowing, and therefore she can't run off to the woods to have the baby. So she stays in the house and Will's mother helps her give birth. But the shocking part is that she's having twins. Now they've established Agnes earlier as this woman that can kind of see the future. She has visions, right? Her paganism allows this. But in her visions, she's always seen that she has 2 children at her deathbed. But if she has twins, that means there's 3. So how do we square this up? Now, right away, we think that her vision is actually going to come true because the second twin that comes out seems to be a stillbirth. But somehow she ends up breathing and she's surviving. But that's how we come to meet Hamnet and Judith, Will and Agnes's twins. All right, so we're going to skip 11 years into the future now. Will's career as a playwright is taken off, which means that he's home less and less. It appears that Will has been trying to get his family moved to London, but that Agnes is always fearful of Judith's health. The air in London is no good, according to Agnes. So Will determines that he's going to build a house in Stratford for her. His frequent absences, though, are definitely causing some harm between him and Agnes's relationship. It's also clearly not easy on the kids, especially on Hamnet. They seem to have quite the father-son bond between them. But this next absence is going to be the worst yet. Judith is going to catch the plague while he's gone. Will's mother, who's lost 3 children of her own, is convinced that Judith is going to die and is counseling Agnes on letting go. But it isn't Judith that ends up dying from it, it's Hamnet. Anyway, what's fascinating about this movie is that it makes you sit a long time in Agnes's grief. But then, because Will is away and arrives home to find Judith alive, but Hamnet dead, we have to sit through his grief as well, which was also very affecting. But the second half of this movie is really about the long path to forgiveness and peace. Because though Will's grief is stark, Agnes's grief is so strong that it's refusing to forgive Will for not being home when it happened. To the point where even a year later, she just tells him to go, that they don't need him there. It's quite gut-wrenching to see her coldness towards him. I can certainly empathize with her feeling, but sometimes I want her to be like, he lost a son too? Damn. But her grief is making her believe that he cares more about his plays than he does for his lost son or family. But the movie is going to show us how big Will's burden of pain is. He writes Hamlet as an homage to his lost boy. He doesn't even tell Agnes what he's writing. And she only finds out because of her stepmom, who seems to inform her just to hurt her. And Agnes is mad. She's going to go to confront Will about it. She's going to go to London and try to find him. And this is when she finds out that he's living in an attic. Her brother is with her, and even he wonders why the man with the largest house in Stratford is living in this small room. And Agnes is getting the first taste of his grief, that he's not living some ostentatious life without them, that he's actually living kind of austerely. Not finding him there, she goes to see the play. At first she's angry and yelling at the actors to not speak her son's name, which, the audience seems to be pretty mild about. I know they tell her to shush, but I would think they would kick her out for acting like that. What starts to turn her around though is seeing Will as a ghost. But what really gets her turned around is when she sees the boy that Will hired to play Hamlet. He's a spitting image of their son, probably because he's the actor's actual brother. But in this first scene with Will and Hamlet, she sees clearly that Will is rewriting history. He's playing the ghost of Hamlet's father and giving him warning. He's getting to be there for his son in a way that he wasn't able to do in actual life. He wrote it so that he could say goodbye. Now, eventually, we're going to see a stage fight between Hamlet and the villain, and it harkens back to earlier in the movie when Hamlet told Agnes that he wanted to fight on stage in one of his dad's plays. So now she's seeing that this tragedy that was written by her husband is really just a love letter to his son. She comes to the realization, along with the audience, that he's written a tragedy with such grief that not only is he showing that he's mourning his son, but he's making the world mourn his son with him. And in this, Agnes finally sees that the writing is an extension of himself, not an escape. That Will has not just given himself peace by writing it, but has managed to give her and her son peace as well. And that's how the movie ends. Let's find out how it ranked.
Oh, wait.
So the rank is where I rank the movie in 10 categories: story, acting, originality, film coherence, cinematography, score/soundtrack/sound, script structure and dialogue, character relatability, production value, and my rank. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. But before I dive into the rankings, I just want to say if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help me out. But without further ado, the first category is story. Well, this is the opposite of Shakespearean love. It's Shakespearean depression. It's basically the same idea though. Here's the real life story behind what helped him write a famous play. This one feels more real though. Also, it gives him some fidelity in his marriage, which is nicer than the other one. And you know what? I like this kind of story. The whole inspiration for a great work story. I gave it an 8.25. So that brings us to acting, and the acting is quite good. But Paul Mescal is kind of weird to me. I don't really get his appeal. I thought he was good, if a little overdramatic at times. So I don't know what my problem is. Anyway, I thought it was well acted in a kind of expected way. They weren't necessarily doing powerful performances. They were doing the performance that was expected of the script. Anyway, I gave it an 8.5. So that brings us to originality. Well, as I said in story, it took an Oscar-winning dramedy story and turned it into a tragic drama story. It's a period piece that decided not to go so ornate with everything, which makes it feel grounded in a way that others of this ilk haven't. I thought it was interesting the way they depicted paganism as well. Still though, it's really not that original. I gave it a 5. So that brings us to film coherence. There was a very clear flow to it. It's always tough with biopic style films because there's a lot of life to fit in a short time, but they handled it well. I actually saw that Chloé Zhao filmed this in order, and I think it really helps with the coherence as well. I honestly think that for the most part, it handled everything it needed to, especially with the grief, very well. It sat in Agnes's grief long enough for you to understand why she would put up a wall between her and Will. I do, however, think that there were still pieces that felt superfluous and unnecessarily focused. Like, we focused a lot on this cave in the wilderness, and I get that they were going for symbolism here, but it felt just a little unnecessary for a movie with such deep human emotion. Anyway, I gave it a 9. So that brings us to cinematography. The cinematography was often beautiful. Sometimes it felt like they were being too moody with it, like they were trying so hard to push a visual story when they didn't really need to. It was still excellent though. I gave it a 9. So that brings us to score/soundtrack/sound. And this is the part I really didn't understand. I feel like they were going for harrowing with the score, but for me, it just came off as scary unease. Like they were just pushing this inevitable tragedy, and I think it actually might have hit harder if they had gone for a lighter touch in the beginning with the love story, leading up to the tragic loss of Hamnet. Now, it wasn't necessarily bad, but I just didn't feel like it brought forth the right emotion. I gave it a 6. So that leads us to script structure and dialogue. I thought the script was tight in a very good way. They didn't try to do too much with dialogue, which was the right move for this type of movie, and it could have been an easy mistake because it's Shakespeare. It never felt like we were watching something implausible or outside of reality, even though they were introducing elements of almost witchcraft paganism. I thought it was great. I gave it a 9.5. So that brings us to character relatability. And this is where this movie absolutely shines. It creates great empathy by letting you be immersed in the lives of its lead characters. Even the twins are done really well in this fashion. I absolutely empathized with every emotion that was presented. I gave it a 10. So that brings us to production value. The production was excellent. I loved the touch of making everyone just a little bit dirty. I thought that was a great detail to hit. I do think I would have sprung for some umbilical cords in the budget, but that's fine. Costumes were really interesting, and they felt real for the time. And I found myself often wondering if these were actually more accurate costumes than other depictions in other period pieces. I felt like it kind of was. I gave it a 9.85. And that leads us to the final category, my rank. This is a deeply emotionally affecting movie. From that standpoint, it's excellent. The story is an interesting one, and I know this is an adaptation of a novel, but it feels like it could definitely be real. I did have some problems with the way they framed the first half of the movie, especially with the score, but altogether, it was a great movie. I gave it an 8.5. So altogether, that puts Hamnet at an 83.6, which makes it I'd watch it again. This puts it below Sinners, but above F1 for the 2025 nominees. And as far as all time, it puts it just below The Longest Day and just above Peyton Place. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your score for this one in the comments. I'd be curious to see how you're feeling about it. But thanks for listening and/or watching. Check out my other 2025 Best Picture rankings on this channel or any of my other sitcom or movie ranking episodes. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. For up-to-date rankings, check out my website at therankpodcast.com, where you can also email me at john@therankpodcast.com. And if you really want to support the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/therankpodcast. But that's it. It's time to say goodbye, and parting is such sweet sorrow. It's one of those small human moments that helps make the relationship.
Cut!
It's one of those small human moments that helps make the.
Cut!
It's one of those small human moments that help make the relation. Why can't I say this?
That's okay. Take your time.